So let's get right into our program. And welcome, Beth. We're so glad you're here.
Hi,
How are
everybody.
you?
Thanks for having me.
Beth is the director of Save Our Schools Arizona, which is a nonpartisan community-based organization fighting for strong public schools for a strong Arizona. Beth Lewis is a mom, educator, public education advocate, and K through 12 policy expert who fights for a fully and equitably funded school for every Arizona child. As director of Save Our Schools Arizona, Beth works to bring parents, educators, elected officials, business leaders, and community members together in support of Arizona's public schools, which strengthen our communities and our great state. Let's give a nice Democrats Greater Tucson welcome to Beth.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me. I'm going to try and share my slide. Here we go. Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so you already gave me a great introduction. It's really, really wonderful to be here with you all. Would love to see in the chat, just hear more about you all, your relationship with public education, whether you went to school, if you're a parent, a grandparent of a kid in our local public schools in Arizona or elsewhere. Just always nice to kind of remember that anchor that ties us all together. So Save Our Schools Arizona formed 8 years ago. We just celebrated our 8th birthday last week, which is wild to me. My kids were in preschool and kindergarten, and now they're in junior high. So, the years move on, don't they? And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's going on in Arizona, just kind of a baseline of some facts, talk about the voucher program, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening at the federal level in terms of education. None of it's good, obviously. And then we'll talk a little bit about, how you can plug in and help. So, and I believe that I was supposed to leave ample time for Q&A, so I will certainly do that and can't wait to hear your questions. So I'm an educator, like my intro said. I started teaching in 2010 out in the West Valley, and I taught in the Phoenix area for 12 years. And so I really felt all of this very keenly in my classroom, as our teachers continue to feel. Our per pupil funding in Arizona is still 49th in the country. So, our Republican lawmakers down at the state capitol like to brag about their investments in public education, and they just are not keeping up with other states in any way, shape, or form. They're not even keeping up with inflation. And so, some folks will ask me, does that matter? Quality education, can we really throw money at the problem? Why does money matter? And anybody who's been in the classroom, I think really, really deeply feels that money does matter because we've seen it work. So we have the second most crowded class sizes in the whole country. Obviously, it takes a lot of money and resources to lower those class sizes because you need more educators and you need to build more classrooms. And those are very expensive things. So our teacher salaries are abysmal. They continuously rank in the bottom 5, which obviously is part of the teacher retention crisis. The other key reason that teachers state is that they don't feel supported. And what happens often is that teachers have to do the work of so many people. They become a social worker and a counselor and a psychiatrist and a librarian because there aren't enough people on campus to do all of those important jobs. And that really results in burnout. And that is a direct result of the defunding of public schools in our state, which is by design, by the special interests that have pushed in vouchers into our state and are trying to dismantle public schools. Another few key pieces to know: our student to counselor ratio is horrific. The recommendation is 1 counselor to 250 kids. Arizona is at 1 to 650. So, nearly 3 times the caseload. And what that means is that our students are not getting their mental health services that they need. They're not getting the support that they need. And obviously, I don't need to tell you, mental health is a huge crisis, not only in our state, across the country. And it's worsening under the Trump administration, the things that, these kids are dealing with in their real lives. Like, they need support beyond just a classroom educator. And lastly, school facilities. So in the Tucson area, in rural areas, all across the state, we've got school facilities that are dramatically behind. They need repairs. Many buildings actually need to be rebuilt, and there just isn't enough money to do the dramatic scale of things that need to be done. So there is a lawsuit currently, being litigated in the courts that says that school facilities are $2 billion, $3 billion behind since the year 2000. And even if a judge agrees with that case, I don't exactly know how we're going to ever find the money for that, because our lawmakers have been prioritizing funding private school instead of public school. So, speaking of which, this is a really, I think, informative chart. This hockey stick really shows you what happened when the legislature decided to pass universal vouchers. So back in 2012, we had a tiny $1 million program for students with extreme special needs. And every year, special interests like Betsy DeVos and her group, American Federation for Children, and others came in and said, well, we just want a little more, right? We're going to have a new eligibility, and you can kind of see that chart grow. But it wasn't until 2022 when Ducey, on his last day of his last legislative session, forced in vouchers in the 11th hour, the day after Roe v. Wade was overturned, I might add, when everybody was looking that way. He passed universal vouchers. He discarded the will of voters, which had rejected vouchers overwhelmingly. And what we've seen since is this massive skyrocketing growth, which means that our state lawmakers found $1 billion for private schools, which was a choice. They could have invested that money in our public schools, which serve 92% of our kids. But instead, they decided to find that money and push it into private school vouchers, which are mostly being used by richer families in the suburbs. So now we're at a point where more than $1 in $10 in our state K-12 budget are going to vouchers. And there are these hundreds of millions of dollars that could be used to fix all of the things that I talked about, right? So we could fund teacher pay raises with that money. We could reduce class sizes. We could get more counselors in place. We could offer more programs and extracurriculars. We could make our classrooms safer. But again, the legislature has walked away from all of those pieces and has funded vouchers instead. So we kind of call it an opportunity cost. And so what's happening is now that the budgets are really starting to feel the strain, and COVID relief dollars are drying up across our state, so we don't have as much federal funding for our public schools, we're seeing districts starting to make really horrific cuts across the board. So we saw Flagstaff cut bus routes. We're seeing school districts cut just the entirety of their social workers. Just they don't have social workers anymore, which as an educator, I can tell you, we need social workers almost more than we need anything else, at least where I taught. We have districts that are cutting hundreds of teaching positions. I know that Tucson Unified is facing some very, very serious budget cuts, and so are the surrounding districts. And then we've got schools shutting down left and right. And I don't even have a comprehensive list. ABC 15 just reported that in the last calendar year, 20 schools have shut down across the state, which is not normal. That is a much higher number than we've seen in at least a decade, if not more, well before the recession. And Paradise Valley shut down schools. Then we saw Roosevelt School District shut down 5 schools in December. Those are all community-based schools that are historic schools. They are serving majority BIPOC communities, low-income students. And then we had Phoenix Elementary just voted 2 weeks ago to shut down 2 more schools, and the hits keep coming. So there are some folks who like to say, well, we can fund a voucher program and we can fund our public schools. And I'm here to tell you that that is just, it's not true. It is not possible in our state. So the last point with the voucher program is just making sure that folks know that even though, you know, Ducey and all of those folks tried to sell the voucher program as benefiting low-income families, statistically it does not. It mostly benefits higher income folks who are already in private school, mostly the suburbs. It really leaves out rural students. And it's obviously benefiting private schools, not taxpayers who want to know how their dollars are being spent, because there's no accountability. And this just shows you how little accountability there is. Schools in Arizona that are receiving your taxpayer dollars, that are receiving the voucher funds, do not have to be accredited. They do not have to teach to the state curriculum. They don't have to take certified tests. They don't have to hire certified teachers. They don't have to perform backgrounds or safety checks. And they don't have any number of hours or days that they need to teach. And it's also going to the homeschooling program, which is not subject to any of those standards either. So we have the most expansive program in the whole US, and sadly, it's got the lowest standards as well. Okay, I feel like I need to take a deep breath after that because the voucher program is a lot. I'm checking in. I had a question from Karen about Paradise Valley. So Paradise Valley, yeah, so 2 of the 3 district schools that were shut down were Title I schools. So Paradise Valley does have Title I schools in its southern area. And so, yeah, 70% of those 20 schools that have been shut down are Title I. All right, so that's kind of the big picture of what's going on in Arizona in terms of K-12, in terms of funding. Our teachers are amazing. They're working miracles every day in their classrooms. They are doing more with less every single day. And, you know, they're struggling. They're really struggling. They're not getting what they need to teach our kids. And I would argue that teaching our kids is what we should be investing in, the most important investment, not just for our kids, but also for our state, for our communities, and everything else. And what we're seeing happening in Arizona in terms of this dismantling of public schools, this pushing of private schools and vouchers, is really just a playbook that the Trump folks are taking to DC. And we know it because of Project 2025. We know that the Heritage Foundation and the other groups that wrote Project 2025 were, they lifted up Arizona's vouchers as the model several times within Project 2025. And they were the ones who pushed vouchers into our state in the first place. A lot of folks learn about Heritage because of that Project 2025 document, but we've been dealing with them in Arizona for 20 years. So unfortunately, what's happening in DC is probably not new to a lot of us that have been watching what's going on in Arizona, but it is horrifying. So I'm sure you all know that Linda McMahon of WWE fame has been not confirmed as the U.S. Education Secretary. Well, I should add this to my slide. She tried to talk about A1 curriculum last week. So instead of AI, and the week before, she didn't know what IDEA stands for, which obviously, you know, is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is really important to our special education students. So this woman doesn't know what she's doing, is my point. She doesn't know anything about education, but she's in charge. And she wrote to the Department of Education employees the day that she was confirmed, calling her actions the final mission, because we know that Trump and she want to dismantle it, which it's kind of crazy to take a job that you know you're gonna, like, you know, undo within a year, but that's what she's done. So a week after that, we saw massive cuts and layoffs at the Department of Education. The Department of Education is really important because it oversees civil protections for our students, and it disperses critically important funds to our most vulnerable students. So those cuts are really going to interfere with legal rights, right? And that oversight. You can have laws in the books, but if you don't have anybody who's in place to make sure those laws are actually being put in place, then the laws don't really matter. And I think that's what we're kind of missing in this conversation is kids don't have protections. The week after that, so a couple of weeks ago, there was an executive order to eliminate the Department of Ed. That is threatening nearly $150 billion in federal K-12 funding. Arizona receives a ton of that funding. I'm going to see, I had a map. Sorry, that might be next. But I will point out that Arizona receives a lot of federal funding, mostly because our state doesn't do its part. So we really need the Department of Ed more than most. So we receive about $200 to $300 million in each of these programs. So Title I for low-income students, IDEA for students who are receiving special education, and then the Johnson O'Malley program and McKinney-Vento for homeless students and Native American students. So clearly this is very, very important to Arizona, and it's about 20% of our funding. So you can see across the US, different states receive different different shares of that funding. Ours is very high. And based on everything I told you, I think you can see that we don't have any fat to trim from our school budgets. All right, so a lot of people at this point ask me why they're spending, millions and billions of dollars to enact this horrible agenda. What is their plan? And, the only answer is that they're trying to privatize public education. Some of them are doing that because they want to make a profit. Some of them are doing it because they want to advance religious education. That's like Betsy DeVos's groups. And some of them are doing it because they just want no government involvement in education. Regardless, I think that we can all see that the dismantling of public schools is incredibly harmful to our communities, but also to our democracy. Because without public schools, we will not have free, accessible schools in students' neighborhoods. Instead, we would have a for-profit model that can cherry pick students. And I would argue that that will truly erode our democracy because we won't have an educated citizenry. So sorry. So the last piece I'll say is the Trump administration is talking about something called block grants. You're probably going to hear a lot about that. You'll hear them say that we think that federal funding should be returned to the states. I like this little meme because it makes the connection between the mothers of massive resistance who fought against segregation in the South, and their argument was return education back to the states. They were actively pushing vouchers in the South post Brown v. Board because they didn't want to integrate their schools, right? And these folks, many of them are still alive and their children are alive, and a lot of this really does have to do with the battle of whether we should have public schools that are integrated, that are serving all students. There are plenty of people that don't want their kids to go to school with kids that are different than them, right? Kids that look different, think differently, love differently. And so we really see that battle crystallized in the fight for public education. If block grants, if all of this funding that I've talked about is returned to states, then our state legislature will be able to take that funding and redistribute it because it is completely discretionary. So that means, if Congress allows this, then they can say, we don't need that much money for Title I. Let's give $200 million to private school vouchers and just only keep a little bit for Title I. And they would be able to do that. And we know that that's the plan. There is a national voucher bill. It's not moving right now, but they may try to tie it into budget reconciliation bills. So we are keeping an eye on that, which would make a difference in Arizona because it would be federal dollars that people already receiving vouchers could stack on. But at this point, we're just monitoring that. So I would really encourage folks to speak up. I can put this link in the chat. I think that our members of Congress need to hear from us. They need to hear how important public schools are, how important the Department of Education is, and that we do not want to see any funding cuts, federal or state level, and that we need to fund our schools. So speaking up, I know it sounds trite, but your voice truly, truly matters, especially in this moment. If they got a call from all of us in this lunch hour, their offices would probably be wondering what's happening. Why do people all of a sudden care about public education? And, we start to replicate that across the state, and our members of Congress need to hear from us. So I hope that you all will take a little bit of time to do that after we talk. And I'm going to stop talking so that I can hear from you all.
We have a couple of questions in the chat already. Sherry Goncharski would like to know how charter schools fit into the whole scheme of schools here in Arizona.
Yeah, great question. So I think, charter schools came in about 30 years ago in Arizona. So in a lot of ways, that system has sort of allowed itself to get baked in. And I truly believe that that was sort of a way to till the soil to make this privatization something that would be palatable in Arizona, right? Like it was a way to start blurring the lines between public and private. And we're seeing multiple court cases going up to the Supreme Court that are trying to make charter schools, publicly funded charter schools, uh, be able to be religious. And we know in Arizona, we don't have religious charter schools. But if the St. Isidore case, for example, from Oklahoma is successful, then overnight, every charter in our state could become religious, which then really kind of begs the question, what's the difference between a charter and a private school? I always think that the sole goal of all of this is to blur the lines between public and private and to move as much funding into privately run institutions as possible. And a lot of that is also tied up in their hatred of teachers' unions. We know that some charters have unionized, but it's very rare. Private schools do not have unionization. And so, it's all part and parcel. But I would say charters are a bullet train to vouchers, and here we are.
Lucy, why don't you unmute and ask your question?
Okay, thanks. Welcome, Beth.
Hi, Lucy.
Hi. So I saw that you were at the convention with Tim Walz, and he had your T-shirt from Save Our Schools, which was very exciting. Now, tell me a little more about that organization. I think I went to one of their conferences years ago, and I really liked it, but I just kind of forgot all about it. So what are they up to?
Yeah, so the Network for Public Education is still run by Diane Ravitch, who, is an absolute lion of a woman, a public education champion. She's published tens of books. I don't even know how many. And then Carol Burris. And so they bring together AFT and NEA local groups, all kind of under the same umbrella. So it's a very big tent, and it's all about protecting our schools from privatization. So the weekend was full of panels and all sorts of thought leaders discussing their research. Yeah, it was great. This was my 5th time going to one, and I found it really productive. And yeah, just really support that organization. It's great to be, just to be with other education advocates who are fighting these same fights in their states, and sharing that knowledge is so important. So
Thanks.
Great. We have Sandy Sauls has this question.
I'm Sandy Salspeth. I don't think we've ever met. I'm out here in Sun City, Oro Valley, and beautiful, beautiful place to retire. And I was able to get here because going way back when in beautiful St. Louis County, Missouri, public education got me going. But did I hear you correctly? That roughly 10% of the state educational budget goes to private schools, 90% still wind up in the public arena. How does SOS and anybody else in the political world get this 90% of moms, dads, and grandparents to get rid of these clowns we have in the state legislature. If 90% of the voters with kids have kids that will benefit from public education, why do they shoot themselves in the head?
You said it. I mean, I wish I knew. All I can say is we do have so many amazing parents that are waking up, but it also feels like it's just too slow. We need more teachers out spreading the truth. We need more parents out spreading the truth. Our teachers are so exhausted that, like, honestly, asking them to get up on a Saturday morning and go canvass for political candidates, it's impossible considering the workloads that they have. So I agree with you. I think it does lay on the parents, and parents inherently don't want to be political about schools. So we've got to get them to realize, like, it's not being what you think of as political. It's just electing local people who care about your kids. I think that issue is really being, like, magnified at the legislature right now because the Republicans I don't even know what they're doing. They're just shooting themselves in the foot left and right with this disability services fight. They just keep saying that they're not going to give these parents any funding, and they look like they actually are, which is callous. They look like they don't care about children, and that's the reality. I mean, I've gone down there and I've met with these people, like, behind closed doors. They do not care about our kids. They don't care about our schools. And so I think it's just getting more and more people to see that and to elect real people who are educators and parents who just actually care about our kids and not worry about the party or the, thinking they're political. I think it's going to go a lot better in 2026. I'm going to be totally honest. I knocked thousands of doors. Our team knocked hundreds of thousands of doors last cycle. And I do believe that the MAGA impact was enough that we just couldn't win. I think 2026 will look very, very different. And I'm really hoping that people can connect the dots from the top of the ticket, and also including the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state. We got to keep those guys in power because they're doing great work. And then we've got to get our state legislature flipped. We just have to.
Could I add one more piece to what you just said? When knocking on doors like this, was there any sense that moms and dads who answered that door and talked to you were, how do I put this, striving to reach, maybe one of these days I could be in that private sector and get my $7,000? Did you get any sense of that's a goal for some people to cross that bridge and get to that side and leave the public education arena?
I talked to some folks who used a voucher, and we weren't there to judge. We were just there to talk about these candidates and how, this totally off the rails, uncapped, unbudgeted program is hurting our local public schools. And I think people generally, met with that. I had one lady apologize, say, I'm sorry, I teach at the local private school, so I really can't talk to you. And it's like, yeah, but you're a taxpayer and your tax dollars are going to these Gilbert public schools. Let's talk about these school board members. Let's talk about these lawmakers. So, and people do genuinely want their taxpayer dollars to be wisely utilized. So if you can move past their personal choices, and move into the bigger picture, I think people generally will come along with you unless you judge their choice. And then they're like, why are you at my door interrupting my breakfast and judging my life choices? So we try to stay away from that. I guess to your question, I mean, now that we have universal vouchers and anybody's eligible, I do feel like people have kind of made the choice they're going to make. And, until we switch the eligibility for that program, I don't think there are people that are thinking like, oh, someday I'm going to use a voucher. I think, like, if you were going to use it, you'd probably be using it. And statistically, we know most of the people using it were already choosing private school. There's not a lot of switchers. People love their schools. I mean, they really do. Like, that is the thing that comes across more clearly than anything. They just don't vote in accordance with it. And somehow the other side has gotten this unearned trophy for being, financially responsible. And I don't understand that because they are so irresponsible with our taxpayer dollars. It boggles my mind.
Yeah, Beth, is there any oversight to the private schools or the charter school as far as finances go?
So charter schools, yes, charter schools, because they're publicly funded and they're run through the charter board. There is a lot of oversight. I like to say, let me get in the Zoom window. Public schools have this much accountability and transparency. Charter schools have about this much, and private schools are all the way down at my floor. There's none. There's absolutely none. So private schools don't have to open their books to you, even if their school is getting millions of dollars of ESA funding. You could go to their office and say, "Hey, I want to see your books. You're receiving all of my taxpayer dollars," and they have no reason to share it with you. They don't have, elected school boards, nothing.
Are there any states that went full bore with the vouchers that have done a turnaround? Any success stories?
Yeah, so Illinois last year was the first state to sunset their voucher program. Their voucher program was run a little differently than ours, but I've met with the organizers who led that coalition effort, and it's interesting. They're a blue state, but they still had blue lawmakers who were reluctant to turn the program around because they were in like the equivalent of a Scottsdale or a Paradise Valley where so many people were using the voucher. And so the only way they were really able to turn it around in a blue state is to point out how discriminatory these schools are, based on, religion, but also discriminating LGBTQ plus children, et cetera. And that's how they turned it around there.
George has a question. He wants to know what's happening with the aggregate expenditure limit now in the Arizona legislature. And I guess my follow-up would be, is it going to be politicized again this year?
Great question. So last year, during the budget negotiations, the AEL was lifted for this year. So you won't see that be a political football in this budget, but it's back on the table for next year. We, along with other education advocacy organizations, have asked for not only a one-year extension like we keep getting, but a long-term fix. The Republicans are not interested in a long-term
They get
fix.
to use it as leverage every year. Just for people who may not be aware, can you tell us what the AEL is and how it came about?
Yeah, it's essentially a cap on what schools can spend. It's tied to basically the amount of money that schools are spending. If you go over that trigger point, it's usually about $1.4 billion. And the legislature has to vote to approve that expenditure. So if they said, let's just say they said you could spend $7 billion on public education next year, and then you get to March and they haven't approved that last 1.4 billion, they could say, never mind, you don't get to use it. All the schools have to shut down in March.
Which is crazy.
Yeah. I don't think they ever actually would be able to do it because I think it would be political suicide, but
Yeah. Karen wants to know, she says, it was my understanding that Paradise Valley and Scottsdale were using the most vouchers of any other counties or areas in the state, and that most of those students were already attending private school when they took the vouchers. Is that not the case? And I think it is.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I think so when I was pointing out that Paradise Valley public schools had shut down, I was saying that some of those schools were Title I schools. And so that's actually a really great case study of a richer area that is overly utilizing vouchers. And that's leading to local Title I public schools serving low income kids that are shutting down, which is kind of the design, sadly.
And my question is, what bills have been passed and signed by the governor this year that might affect education, if any?
So far, none of the bills that we've been tracking have been signed by the governor. That's because the legislature is run by the Republicans. They have a majority in both the House and the Senate. And so the bills that they're passing, we're really asking the governor's office to veto. And some of those are coming down the pike right about now. There's one, gosh, there's one about chaplains in schools, so replacing counselors with religious chaplains. There's one, there's a lot of pretty gross stuff about trans kids, you know, people being able to share their information and out trans kids, etc. There is one bill, I'm going to pull this up, I don't want to get the number wrong. There's one bill that we're watching in particular that we're asking the governor to not support. It is going to be heard in the Senate this week. HB 2704 would give the Diamondbacks a huge kickback. You know, studies show that giving those kinds of handouts to sports teams does not lead to, you know, additional wealth in the community. It doesn't really help the economy. We know that the D-backs are owned by the Kendrick family, which is, you know, a huge Republican donor.
Yeah.
And Governor Hobbs has actually signaled that she might support it. So
Yeah,
that, I
crazy.
mean, yeah, considering how little funding we have for
Yeah.
anything in this
And how that
state.
doesn't violate the gift clause of the Arizona Constitution forbidding gifts to individuals and organizations, I fail to understand.
Well, maybe if it passes, somebody's going to need to sue them on that. I like that angle.
Is there any plans in the works with SOS or anybody else to run a voucher ban proposition on the ballot so that Arizona citizens can have a say? Because, you know, whenever they're asked about vouchers and private, you know, publicly funding private schools, they say, hell no. So why don't we just go around the legislature and do an initiative and put it on the ballot and ban this crap? I mean, is anybody thinking about that?
Yeah, I love that question. We get it a lot, and we are definitely thinking about it. And we have some national organizations that would very much like to see us do this as well, and hopefully would have some resources for our state. I mean, I think most folks want to wait until the legislature at least is done this cycle, because if we filed, they would immediately turn around and put something on the ballot that would counter, right? Like that would counteract what we were trying to do.
Of course.
And they're very good at that. And they don't need the governor to do that. They don't need anybody. They could they could do it in one day.
Right.
So you know, there's that. And also Proposition 123 has been muddied by the poison pill of vouchers. The Republicans behind closed doors are trying to add a voucher protection clause to Prop 123. So if the governor and everybody comes together with a compromise to put 123 back to voters and for teacher pay raises, for example, it might also contain language that enshrines vouchers in our Constitution, which obviously we would like to go head to head against, because we can't just let that stand. So those talks are ongoing. I think we just really want to be strategic and not shoot ourselves in the foot.
Susie has her hand up.
Thanks. I just wanted to know how we get to unseat all those deeply red, flawed reps and senators in our Congress, in this Arizona Congress. How do we do that? I mean, you know, the Walt Blackman, the Petersons, you know, the names are all running together because there's so many and they're so deeply red. How do we get to the voters in those areas that just seem to reelect them all the time?
Well, I'm not a giver upper, and we talk to voters all across every single legislative district, but I do think that your example, so Blackman is in a very, very safe, to your point, very red district, Peterson as well. There are better districts where we can flip a little faster while also having conversations with people there, because, you know, I mean, Warren Peterson is not representing the people of Gilbert, for example. I live in Chandler. I'm close by. I know those people. Like he's a horrible human, and getting them to understand that. And I don't think that's going to happen when Trump's on the ballot. But luckily, well, knock on wood, that's not going to happen again. So these conversations are ongoing and they're important. But LD 17 near you all is the example of what we really need to focus on. So LD 17 is Oro Valley, Saddlebrook, a little bit of Marana, right? Or all of Marana. So LD 17, we knocked doors like crazy. Coalition members, lots of folks knocked lots of doors for school board and legislature together. So we really, really helped bolster those efforts. And they had 3 very red, very MAGA representatives, 1 in the Senate, 2 in the House. And we were able to defeat one of the House members with Kevin Volk. And so I think that that's a case study of like exactly what to do is you pick them off one by one. I think this next cycle, we can probably get the LD17 Senate, right? And then you're building from people who thought that they were really, really conservative to seeing what that looks like and realizing, well, I'm actually just a little bit more moderate than that. And I'm going to go with this guy who happens to have a D next to his name. We saw that happen even in like the Tempe Chandler area where from 2014, 2016, 2018, they moved the 3 seats from all red to all blue, and they've kept a hold of that for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
So I think, the knocking doors matters, having great candidates matters. And, if you can, even if you can donate, if you can have a house party, if you can just get folks in front of these candidates, share that information, you're doing your part.
So I have another question, if you don't mind. What is going on with our superintendent of public instruction? That was one of our big losses statewide last cycle. Was we did not get Kathy back in there, and we got Tom Horn, of all people, as our SPI. Can you tell us what he's been up to? I even hear that he's getting a challenge from the right potentially in the next cycle. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, Tom Horn doesn't have any friends right now, which, he shouldn't. Even his name just makes me feel nauseous. He is currently attacking districts and trying to basically putting himself in the position of being a DEI cop and narking on our districts to the feds and threatening to withhold funding from them. So there's a district called Kyrene in Tempe, which just took it on the head this last week. He put out this press release saying, hey, you're doing DEI. I'm telling the feds on you. You're going to have $1.5 billion less in your budget. And they're standing up to it. And they're saying, read our policy. It's not what you say it is. So I think good people are really learning to stand up to him. He is trying to get some very small limitations in the ESA voucher handbook for parents. And that's why he's going to get primaried from the Freedom Caucus, which is Jake Hoffman and his ilk. It's an interesting battle to watch because in my mind, the limitations he's introducing are nothing. It's like, oh, you can only spend $3,000 per kid for musical instruments every 3 years. It's like, that's a lot of money. Like, oh, you can't buy a large refrigerator for your kitchen. But Jake Hoffman and his crew think that there should be absolutely 0 limitations on the voucher program. So he's not making himself any friends. I don't feel bad for him. I don't know. What else has he been up to?
They're running this Doge craziness at the federal level to fight waste, fraud, and abuse, but they're absolutely resistant to any kind of accountability or financial oversight when it comes to the ESA program here at the state.
Susie, did you have another statement or question?
Yes, I did. I was wondering, there was a nice article in the Star regarding putting a Mormon Church of Latter-day Saints seminary in one of the schools in Vail. Is there anything to prevent that? Besides the fact that we're supposed to be separating church and state?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could certainly lead to a lawsuit because we have a Blaine Amendment, which in our state constitution, which does separate church and state. I also think that that's a bill, right, Susie? Or is that just a move that they're making?
That's just move the school board is making. Yeah.
That's right.
As far as I know, the ACLU is planning on filing suit against that action.
Yeah. And we have a long-standing practice of having seminaries right next to public schools, and that's a system that has worked for folks of the LDS faith for 100 years in Arizona. Like no matter where you are, it seems like in the state there's a seminary nearby, and I don't know why it has to be on campus, except they're trying to get something in front of the Supreme Court, you know?
Well, here's one for you. At our happy hour, we'll bring in folks that are on the school board that are up for reelection. And they'll share some of the same statistics, similar statistics that you've shared today, like how few guidance counselors there are, how few librarians there are. Is there anything we can do to help with that?
You know, I think a lot of folks just don't know these facts. It is so critical to get this information out. I've got a really cool tool I was going to share with y'all, and you might be able to just share this. Sorry, give me 1 second. We have a new tracker that shows folks how much money is going to vouchers in their district. So
Cool.
here's the website. I think it's really eye-opening for people. Like sometimes numbers are too big. Like when you hear 1 billion at the state level, it's like, what do we do about that? But if you hear that local level, it just tends to kind of resonate a little bit more. So here's the
Absolutely.
tracker embedded. Sorry. So you can look up like Tonka Verde. That's
Tucson Unified has 3,742 vouchers in the district, which is draining $37.4 million from the district. Wow. That's a lot.
It is
Yeah.
true.
that's 623 teachers and staff that could be hired across your schools, right? I think Tucson has about 80 schools in the district, so we're talking about major staffing.
Yeah, some of our members in the chat room have pointed out that, for instance, Kathleen Cahill says, throughout history, tyrants and dictators have gained and kept control of power through ignorance, basically. So knowledge is power. So they want to keep the peasants ignorant. Our democracy depends on public education. Wholly agree with that. We didn't really become a universal democracy until we started having public schools in the 19th century. So yeah, there's a deep, deep connection between an educated populace and an aware populace who knows what the Constitution is and how it's supposed to work, and knows what democracy is and values it, and knows what's going on in their communities, and has input and democratic agency in having a say in that. So yeah, absolutely, you are right, Kathleen. That is a deep connection, and it is the reason why we're seeing these attacks on public schools, is not only because there's a pig to slaughter there, billions and billions of dollars of public funds, but also, they just hate the fact that the state is educating people on objective facts and science instead of superstition and hate.
Yeah, I mean, if we keep pushing these vouchers, we're going to have a two-tiered system, right? We're going to have these elite schools that only the wealthy can access, and then public schools for everybody else. And that does not lead to a healthy democracy. So I
No, that
couldn't
leads
agree
to
more.
oligarchy. Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it looks like we have no further questions in the chat. Do you have any follow-up final questions there, Joe?
Well, just want to appreciate, your being with us today, and all your efforts, Beth, and I'd like to thank once again all our Democrats of Greater Tucson who checked in today and asked great questions, and I bet some of you are going to be doing a little bit of homework in your own area. So
I encourage everybody to subscribe to SOSAZ's email newsletter, because it gives you quite detailed information about what's going on in the Arizona legislature about public education, and gives you information about how to participate and how to make your voice heard on public schools here in Arizona. So yeah, they do a great job.
okay.
Thanks for coming, Beth. We appreciate you so much.
You were
Thanks so
amazing.
much for
It was
having
really
me.
great, Beth. You did great.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.